Hello everyone, today's writing video is the basics of writing free verse poetry. So what is free verse poetry? This is a quote from the Poetry Foundation, which I love so very much. I was introduced to the Poetry Foundation website when I was in poetry class in 2014, and if I need anything that has to do with poetry or want to read poetry, I go to this website. And no, I am not being paid to say that. I actually really like it. So what is the definition? The definition from Poetry Foundation is non-metrical, non-rhyming speech that closely follows the natural rhythms of speech. A regular pattern of sound or rhythm may emerge in free verse lines, but the poet does not adhere to a metrical plan in their composition. There's no such thing as rules unless you make up rules for that specific poem in free verse poetry, and it's been around for hundreds of years, so this is a free-for-all. So what is distinctive that you can tell between a verse poem versus a free verse poem? There's a lot of simile and metaphors and images, a lot of personification, and it might include alliteration, and it might even include rhyming if that poet feels the need to rhyme in some sort of way. And there is some sound effects that match our normal way of speaking, or the poet's normal way of speaking. It's abstract, it's not concrete. There's no stanza pattern unless you, the poet, want to have a stanza pattern. And to create free verse poetry, there's a heightened attention to the five senses, sound, and emotions. So I'm going to give you 4 examples from my own poetry that I just decided to pull that I could actually find that is appropriate as well as short. So the first one is, this is an alliteration example. I took this to the extreme. I used all ends. Number 2 is a touch example, one of the 5 senses. It is not overly obvious, but there is hints of touch involved where you're getting the image of the feel of touching. The 3rd example is multiple stanzas. You can do as many stanzas as you want because this is free verse, and if you want 20 stanzas, go for it. If it is a good read, it doesn't matter. And the last one is repetition. I decided to do this for the emotional effect. Now you might do this because it rhymes, you might do it because it just looks good as a poem as a whole, you might do it because that's just what comes to your mind for that particular poem and you didn't actually plan it out. And side note, the last 3 examples comes from Teal Nostalgia, which you can find on Wattpad, but I'll give the direct link to Teal Nostalgia if you're interested in the description box below. Now, writing free verse poetry, that can be very daunting in the beginning, and that's why when you take classes on poetry and you're writing poetry, the teachers or professor will give you prompts of verse poetry that you have to do in the beginning, and then by the middle or end of the class or college course, then you get into free verse. And these are basic classes, like 101, like this video right here. For people nowadays, I think free verse poetry is open to interpretation more so than the verse poetry. And that means you can have poetry that means 10 different things to 10 different people because of the similes and metaphors and the different length of stanza, the alliteration, and the repetition, all of that. It's really up to the reader to see what they gain from that poem. I would say, since it's free verse poetry is so open-ended, find something that inspires you, like music, a movie, your spouse, your dog or cat, doesn't matter, and go with it. Sometimes, especially with poetry, I would say you have to find that inspiration spark. Mine happens in my chest and it feels very warm and I feel an itch to write poetry. And that's when I turn on some Lana Del Rey and I keep going and going and going, and oh wow, I've written 10 poems already. Don't try and write poetry that you think will become popular, because, well, it's very rare to become well known for poetry. I'm gonna say it right now. So that means you have the creative license to do and write what you want and what is meaningful for you. And if you want to share it on sites like Wattpad or allpoetry.com or Tumblr or Instagram or whatever, for your readers as well. But first, find the inspiration and just let it flow. This is the feeling of free verse poetry. You don't have any guidelines. So if you want to have 5 words in one line, and then you have 10 in another line, and then you have 8 in the next line, and then you break off and you're in another stanza, that's free verse poetry. You don't have to adhere to any sort of rule. If it flows well, and if it has meaning, and if it gives you an emotional reaction, that's what we want in free verse poetry, not strict guidelines on how to write something, and then comes the emotion and meaning. When you continue to write more and more poetry, you will have a writing style, even though it's like a very lackluster and not really formed writing style, because this is free form. But I tend to write relatively short poems, on occasion long poems. I don't write many stanzas, and I like to keep my stanzas short, and I like to center my poetry. Your topics might even be similar. Maybe all you write about is nature. Maybe you just write about mental illness. Maybe you write about politics. Whatever it is, it comes out eventually. And you can deviate. Of course, I deviate. I usually talk about mental illness, trauma, love, and heartbreak, but sometimes I go off into nostalgia and nature. Just whatever tickles your free verse poetry fancy. And you don't have to force anything out. I think it's for free verse poetry that's worse, because then you begin to lose the inspiration flow, and then you're second guessing yourself and you're thinking, okay, well, this stanza is this way, then this means that this next stanza has to be similar. No, it doesn't. It's just whatever it is. Of course, you can go back and edit, and I do think you should go back and edit, but take a few days away from that free verse poem and then come back to it. And if there's typos, of course, fix them. If you want to add in commas, or you want to change some words to different words, whatever it may be, that's totally acceptable, because it's free verse and you can do whatever you want. If you want to make your poem into 5 stanzas instead of 3, doesn't matter. It's whatever flows. Flow is definitely important for free verse, since there is no rules whatsoever unless you create them. So read your poems out loud and in your head multiple times before showing it to the world, if you choose to do so. And make sure you love it. Unless you are looking for critiques, then totally let it out there and the poets will come to you. But I really think that you can only do so many edits for free verse poetry before you lose that inspirational, emotional spark that you originally felt. I've done that before, and I've had to trash quite a few poems because I kept going back and changing them, and that feeling after 5 edits was lost. So I would advise not doing that and making my mistakes. And no matter the length, the topic, if you have a lot of commas or no periods, or a lot of stanzas or short or long lines, free verse poetry is whatever you want it to be, and if it makes an impact on you and your readers, free verse has done its job. Thank you so much for watching my video of how to write free verse poetry 101. If you liked what you just saw, comment with your thoughts below. Like, subscribe, and share to your poet friends. And if you want to get to know me or any of my writing, all of that is in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great writing day. Bye!